And then post-16, because we've now got an education, health and care plan, which is a plan that's across all three agencies, so bringing everybody together to make that plan in the future, instead of it just being education and then, if you're lucky, some health and social care somewhere else. Because there's now this duty to have this joint plan that goes from 0 to 25, it also means that learning disability assessments are disappearing. And if you're worried about that, it's actually a really good thing, because the education, health and care plan has far clearer statutory duties about what's supposed to be provided for children and young people than the old learning disability assessments had. So from September the 1st, any new young people going through transition, if they're starting from next year, academic year, they will now have an education, health and care plan if they need one, rather than a learning disability assessment. Doesn't mean everybody has to have one. Many young people will go through the whole process without needing one. But where they do, again, it will include now education, health and social care, and some new rights for young people post-16. So post-16 young people in their own right will have the right to request an education, health and care plan. They'll have a right to name the setting if they have an EHC plan, request a personal budget, and make representations about their plan to other people. So it's a whole new set of rights for young people post-16. And if they're unhappy about that provision, even the right to go to tribunal as part of that. And the Code of Practice says they have to be able to follow a coherent study programme while they're at college, and then at the end of college there has to be a clear pathway from college through to adult health and social care. So some very significant changes post-16, and of course that principle of parental involvement starts to shift to one of young people being far more involved and consulted much more directly about their own lives. But parents don't totally disappear from the picture, and the Code of Practice is very clear that routinely parents' views would also be taken into account in that process, but actually legislatively the focus does shift towards children and young people as part of that process. I said I'd say briefly a bit more about the SEN information report. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every point on this slide, but essentially why I wanted to put this up is, for those of you that are working with the Charter, you will see a lot of similarities between Rotherham's Charter and what schools are required to do as part of their SEN information report. And that's no accident, because again, in looking at the Charter, it was one of the influences on how we thought we needed to change the information that schools were supposed to provide to parents at that level, and that sense of a kind of quality approach to what schools were doing, with a lot of transparency about what they were aiming for. And so to be a good school at SEN, and you're required, every school's required to produce one of these, and they're required to put this report on their website in a form that's easily understandable for parents, and it's also part of then the conversation with the local authority about whether the school's being able to demonstrate what it does with its delegated budget. The school has to be good at saying how it meets the needs of children with SEN within that school. It also has to say then what arrangements it's got for consulting parents, the arrangements it's got for consulting children and young people, how they assess and review progress of children within the school with SEN, what arrangements they have for supporting children with SEN moving across phases of education, what their overall approach is to teaching children with SEN disability. Sounding familiar to any of you that are working on the Charter? What adaptations you make in the school to ensure that children with SEN and disability can learn. What is the expertise and training of your staff so that you can properly meet children's needs. One of the biggest things in the inquiry that we found was that parents look up the system the whole time to see where they can get the most specialist support for their children. Someone that understands my child came up time and time again when we were doing the inquiry. So what resources has the school got? What expertise has the school got? And if it hasn't, where does it go and get that from? How effective are those professionals in the school? So again, the conversation needs to move away from how many hours of support do we all get to actually what are those hours of support achieving? And I know it's very important for parents, and you look a lot of the time of, wow, am I getting my child getting 5 hours of LSA or 7 hours, and should they be getting 10 hours? And I understand that debate, but actually I would humbly suggest the question you ought to be asking more is what outcomes are you achieving for my child with that support? Is it the right support to achieve those outcomes, or does my child need something different from that? I'm not saying provision isn't important, of course it is, but that provision needs to be focused on what outcomes we're achieving. Sometimes you can see situations where a child has been receiving provision for years and the outcomes haven't moved, and that's what we need to question in the system. How are we getting those better outcomes? And then what support is in the school for developing that broader emotional and social development of children and making sure they're fully included in everything that the school is doing. And then how the school works with and involves other bodies such as health and social care. How does everybody come together around the child? It's no accident that this is a Children and Families Bill. This isn't about SEN in a little box over here anymore. It's about children and families, and then everything that needs to go around them to make this system work. And this is what the legislation is trying to drive at. How do you do that within some of these service contexts in this kind of way? So that's a very broad overview of just some of the key areas of provision within the legislation and how it's supposed to work in relation to that. And I want to just come back to now, how does the Charter fit with all of that? Well, hopefully you can see how a lot of that learning about, by having better conversations with service providers, with schools, with other people, working together in a partnership where those views have been taken on board. Let's say a partnership, it's not one side or one side's view being more important than the other, but how you work together to come to some agreement and some conclusions jointly, instead of having what we often have in the system at the moment is lots of conflict where things aren't being worked on together. How does that all work? And you can see as you go through the legislation the various points at which you must consult with parents, you must deliver better outcomes, you must consult with young people. And those are the kind of principles that were absolutely embodied in how the Charter actually worked, and it was that helped inform the way some of that was constructed and put together. And it meets the needs to improve communication, and it builds on that partnership and co-production, to use the jargon of the day, with parents, carers, children and young people. By promoting that way of working, it can support a whole school approach to leadership. One of the other crucial things we found in the inquiry was that it's no use individual SENCOs or individual professionals within a bit of a service working away at this on their own. I know, and I've met and I have friends with some brilliant professionals in the system that have struggled for years to try and produce really good outcomes for children with SEN disability. And they are frustrated as the parents that actually, where is the leadership in the system that makes this happen? Where is the leadership at school? Where is the leadership within the local authority or the health authority that makes this happen? So this has got to be something where it's also strategically about the leadership within the school or within the provision that makes this happen as well. And again, it seems to me that the Charter is a brilliant vehicle for making some of that happen. And actually, if you're doing everything within the Charter, you're probably quite confident that you're doing a lot of the things that you should be doing within the Code of Practice at the same time. So, I know I've gone slightly over time, but even then I'm sure I've hardly started to touch the surface of some of the issues we'd all like to talk about. But if we can get this right, using the Charter, using those principles of greater parental and young people's involvement in how we improve those services, what we should really hope from this system is that if we get that change of values and that focus in place, children and young people with SEN will be achieving better outcomes and attainment and closing the gap with their non-SEN peers, that parents will have more confidence in the system and conflict will be reduced, and what resources are available will be effectively deployed within the system. So we may not have the resources we want, but we can make the best use of them. And that families are clear about what is on offer locally to support them and have influenced what that looks like. We're both near the start and the finish line of all of this. As I've mentioned, the 1st of September, everything you've heard about this morning in your workshops and today through me, at least some of that has to be in place. But for me, that's not really the finish line, it's the start line. Because if we're serious about this being a change in culture and the way we all work together, that's not going to happen overnight. I'd love to say to you all that your lives are going to be transformed and your children's lives are going to be transformed on the 1st of September. I'm sure we're all old enough to know that the world doesn't quite work like that. But what I do hope and what I do see, and I certainly see it in the Charter and in the way Rotherham's working, is that people really are committed to a new way of working, and actually that change is beginning to happen. And that change will happen every day in every individual thing that professionals do, that parents do, in starting to change this from a system where we have a maze and where people get told what they're going to get, to one where we're all working together to make that happen. So the thought I'd like to leave you with is one that my daughter found for me on Pinterest. And it basically says, "Dear optimist, pessimist and realist, while you guys were arguing about the glass of water, I drank it the opportunist." And what I all want you to be in relation to this system is the opportunist. We can all argue about what should have been in the legislation or what isn't, but that's what we've got now. And for all of you, whether you're professionals or parents or young people in this room today, wanting and hoping that this is going to deliver a better life for you, what you really need to do is grab hold of the things that are there, grab hold of the support that is there, and really use that to help, working together, make a difference in all your lives. I wish you every good luck in that, and Rotherham will always be close to my heart because it made a profound impact on our thinking about these reforms, and I hope these reforms will make a profound impact on your lives too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.